These are the official PC specification requirements for Monster Hunter Wilds, a game that is highly anticipated by many gamers. I wanted to show you guys this screenshot so you can see just what's wrong with games that are being released on the PC today. I'll give you a moment. Yup, in order to play this game at 1080p with medium settings, with what I'd call is 1080p appropriate hardware now, you're expected to utilize frame generation. If that doesn't scream lazy or incompetent optimization to you, then I don't know what will. My fear is that this will become the norm and, as a result, kill proper optimization altogether. We'll be discussing this trend in today's video, but before we get into that, a quick word from our video sponsor. This video is brought to you by MSI and their Datamag 20GB/s magnetic portable SSD. If you're looking for fast, reliable storage on the go, this SSD has got you covered. With read speeds up to 1600 MB/s and write speeds up to 1500 MB/s, it's perfect for handling large files, video editing, RAWs, and high-res photography. Plus, its super speed USB 20GB/s interface means no more waiting around for file transfers. The Datamag also boasts a sleek, durable aluminum casing for top-tier heat dissipation, while weighing just 81 grams. You can take it anywhere, and what's really cool is the magnetic metal ring that lets you snap the SSD directly onto your smartphone. With capacities up to 4 TB, you'll have more than enough storage for work, play, or travel. Best of all, it's fully compatible with iPhones, Android devices, Windows PCs, Macs, and even gaming consoles. It's plug and play with USB-C, or you can use the included USB-C to A adapter for instant connectivity. Personally, I've used this drive to transfer game files and recorded footage between my systems, and it's been a game changer. So whether you're capturing ProRes footage on the go or just need reliable storage for everyday use, MSI's Datamag magnetic portable SSD has got you covered. Check out the link in the description to learn more. Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here. Welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. Today's topic is something I've been wanting to cover for a while now. As someone who's been gaming on the PC for a long time, I've witnessed the evolution of games, hardware, and technologies. However, we're currently in a troubling era where developers are relying too much on upscaling and frame generation technologies to meet performance targets rather than optimize their games properly. I wanted to start this discussion off by reading a quote from a TechSpot article citing Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang. He mentions how we can't do computer graphics anymore without artificial intelligence. He said, we compute one pixel, we infer the other two. I mean, it's incredible. And so we hallucinate, if you will, the other 32. And it looks temporally stable. It looks photorealistic, and the image quality is incredible. The performance is incredible. Now, upon reading that, your first impression might be, so what? What's the big deal if he said that? Actually, that's exactly what you'd expect him to say. His company designs and manufactures hardware along with developing software that utilizes AI. It's in Nvidia's best interest to push AI-driven technologies like DLSS and frame generation. This fits right into their business model. Sell powerful hardware that leverages AI software to make games run faster. But here's the thing, by saying something along those lines, he's promoting more than just his company. He's encouraging game developers to lean into AI technologies to achieve performance gains instead of focusing on optimizing their games properly. And you have this sense of urgency for that targeted audience where if they're not on board with this, they risk being left behind. So that's where I have an issue with this. Now let's talk about the crux of this issue. Modern game developers relying on technologies like Nvidia DLSS and AMD FSR along with frame generation to meet performance goals instead of making sure their games run well on a wide variety of hardware. And it's not just a few developers, it's becoming an industry-wide trend. Take Monster Hunter Wilds as an example, which I mentioned earlier. For a game that targets 1080p medium settings, the system requirements recommend you enable frame generation to get a smooth experience. That's just bullshit, dude. Frame generation, by its very nature, doesn't improve actual in-game performance. It just interpolates frames to make things seem smoother. It should not be called a performance booster, it's actually a frame smoothing technology. You still have to deal with the same underlying performance issues. I'm not saying frame generation is inherently bad. In fact, it's a fascinating technology, and when used correctly, it can enhance the gaming experience, but it should be an optional feature for gamers with high-end hardware, not a requirement for playing a game at mid-range settings. This just feels like a lazy way for developers to avoid optimizing their games for a broader range of hardware. Furthermore, when it comes to frame generation, a lot of people seem misinformed, thinking that you can turn it on at any state and smooth out your performance. Here's the thing, while it may appear smoother, I found the input lag becomes absolutely atrocious at lower lower frame rates, and I recommend that frame generation should only be used if you have a minimum of 60 FPS average. So if you're struggling to run a game and it's running at like 30 FPS, sure, it might look smoother with frame generation. It might look like it's running at 60 FPS, but the input lag will be very noticeable. The other thing is that it's funny how they mention frame generation with medium settings and you have graphics cards like a 2070 in there, which doesn't even support frame generation unless it's using FSR. Let's look at another example, Star Wars Outlaws. This is a game that many were excited about, and it's one of the first open world games set in a Star Wars universe. Sounds great, right? Well, if you're planning to play this game on PC, you better have DLSS or FSR enabled, because regardless, if you're trying to play the game at high settings or with minimum settings, 1080p or 4K, they're recommending you to use upscaling. Like, I'm surprised to see how at the enthusiast level, they're recommending owners of a 4070 or 6800 XT to use upscaling at 1440p high preset, when the game looks like this. Now, it's not horrible, and in some instances it looks good, but it's not what I'd call mind-blowing or a level of visual fidelity that we haven't seen before. The same goes for Monster Hunter Wilds. Like, this isn't a game that looks earth-shattering or anything, and yet it demands frame generation at 1080p medium. What a joke. Here's a clip of a channel called Zero Worms Gaming showing Horizon Forbidden West at 1440p max settings with DLAA, so that's not upscaling, running over 60 FPS on a 4070, and visual fidelity wise, they don't look worlds apart if you ask me. So according to the specs that Ubisoft have listed for Outlaws, that just shows a sign of poor optimization, plain and simple. Another game that I was anticipating myself was Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. I remember playing Test Drive Unlimited 2 on the 360 and having loads of fun with it. Imagine the derailment to my excitement when I saw the PC requirements. Yet another game that requires users to enable upscaling to hit what should be standard frame rates at moderate resolutions. Like a 2080 now is what I'd call a 1080p card. I've said that last year as well, it's an entry-level card at this point, but it's definitely not a 620p card. Yup, they recommend you should use balanced at 1080p. Me personally, I would never go below quality when it comes to upscaling presets, even at 4K, and at that point I'd be lowering other settings. But 1080p balance looks noticeably blurry. And what I find comical about all this is that we're talking about a racing game that doesn't even look that much better, if at all, compared to Forza Horizon 5, which was released in 2021, and that was a game that ran like a total dream. These developers should be embarrassed. This trend of pushing upscaling and frame generation as a crutch for bad optimization is alarming, especially for PC gamers who have invested in high-end hardware. So the question arises then, what the hell happened to proper optimization? Back in the day, we didn't have these kinds of technologies, and developers had to make sure their games ran well on hardware available at the time. Let's take a trip down memory lane. Remember when Crysis came out in 2007? Yes, it did become a meme for being the benchmark of PC performance. At every chance, you had gamers going, "Can it run Crysis?" But the game was also optimized to the best of the developer's ability for the hardware available back then. Sure, you needed a beast of a machine to max it out, but even mid-range PCs could run it at playable settings without the need for fancy upscaling tech. I remember on my first rig, which had an Nvidia 8800 GT, which wasn't anything crazy at the time, and I was able to get a playable experience using a mixture of medium and high settings. Now, I understand that games have become much more complex, with larger worlds, more detailed textures, and more advanced lighting techniques like path tracing. Take a game like Black Myth Wukong, for example. I've been playing this game quite a bit lately, and this is a game with a level of visual fidelity that I said, okay, this actually looks next gen. And I totally get why you'd need upscaling or frame generation to enjoy the eye candy, with our current hardware that is. But as you guys saw, that's not always the case. An example that I'm reminded from last year was Remnant 2, a game that doesn't even have ray tracing and could pass off as a game from 2016 in my opinion. But the developers were basically telling players to turn on DLSS. Regardless, that doesn't mean developers should take shortcuts. Proper optimization means making sure your game runs well across a variety of hardware, not just recommending that players enable DLSS or FSR as a band-aid solution. I remember back in 2018 when Nvidia had first introduced DLSS and real-time ray tracing in games, a lot of their demonstrations showcased the two enabled together. They showcased how demanding ray tracing was, but players could use something like DLSS to compensate for performance loss. A similar tone was set for frame generation generation when that was introduced, and there were showcases of it being used in Cyberpunk with path tracing, which is really demanding, and also Spider-Man Remastered with ray tracing. So in scenarios like those where a highly demanding but substantial visual graphics setting is enabled, that is where frame generation and upscaling make sense. But as we're seeing now, that doesn't appear to be the baseline anymore, and we're gradually dropping our standards. In fact, there's an argument to be made that developers are taking advantage of technologies like DLSS and frame generation to justify releasing games in a less than optimized state. Why bother spending extra time and money optimizing your game for PC when you can just tell your players to enable upscaling to get better performance? Another issue with this reliance on upscaling and frame generation is that it can fundamentally change your gaming experience. Sure, you can get a higher frame rate with these technologies, but the quality of the image suffers. DLSS and FSR aren't perfect, and there's often a noticeable drop in sharpness or clarity. Along with that, artifacting can be introduced when these technologies are used. This is highly dependent on what resolution you're targeting and what preset you use. Like I said earlier, me personally, I find that the quality preset at 1440p or 4K is just as good as native in most cases. Some gamers might not mind this trade-off, especially if they're playing fast-paced games where frame rate does matter more than visual fidelity. But for games that rely on immersion and detail like RPGs or open-world games, Black Myth Wukong was an example that I used, this can detract from the overall experience. And let's not forget that not everyone has access to hardware that supports these features. Older GPUs, or even some mid-range ones, might not be able to utilize DLSS or frame generation, leaving those gamers stuck with subpar performance. So where does this leave us in the long run? Well, if this trend continues, we could see a future where developers stop optimizing their games for PC entirely. Instead, they'll just rely on AI-driven technologies to fill in the gaps. This could lead to a fragmented experience where only players with the latest and greatest hardware get to experience smooth FPS, while everyone else is forced to compromise. What's worse is that this approach could widen the gap between PC and console gaming. One of the reasons why many people choose to game on the PC is because of the flexibility it offers. You can tweak settings to get the best performance and visual fidelity for your specific hardware, but if developers stop optimizing their games properly, that flexibility could disappear. We might end up with games that just run poorly on high-end PCs as they do on consoles, with no way to improve performance except by using upscaling tech and frame gen. Also, what happens when developers start baking in these technologies into games and then there's really no way to disable them? This could definitely lock out players on older hardware that doesn't support the tech, or it could severely tank performance. What happens when developers start catering to one vendor's tech over the other? AMD said that for RDNA 4, they're going to be rolling out a new form of FSR that relies on AI. So while that does mean benefits to performance, image quality, and stability, this does allude to hardware exclusivity. RDNA 3 or RDNA 2 based cards won't be able to utilize it, which is fine. I mean, we have that now where RTX 30 series can't use frame generation in games, but the 40 series can. But like I was saying, what happens when frame gen is baked in at a lower level in the code where you just can't disable it from the settings menu or a config file? What happens when a game only supports Nvidia RTX with their baked-in technologies? Oh, well, you have a Radeon card? That sucks. Better switch to Team Green if you want to enjoy this game. Imagine a world where we actually start to see hardware-exclusive games on the PC. You know what? Actually, don't imagine that. I'm sure nobody wants that to come to fruition. So to wrap it up, while technologies like DLSS, FSR, and frame generation are impressive and can enhance the gaming experience in certain situations, they should never be used as a substitute for proper optimization. Game developers need to stop relying on these technologies as a crutch and start putting in the effort to make sure their games run well across a wide range of hardware. PC gamers, especially those who invest in high-end components, deserve better. We shouldn't have to rely on AI-driven upscaling just to hit playable frame rates at standard resolutions and settings. If this trend continues, we might even see a decline of proper PC game optimization altogether, or the disappearance of it, and that's something that none of us want. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the matter. Have you noticed this trend of poor optimization in recent games? Are you okay with developers relying on upscaling technologies, or do you think they should be doing more to optimize their games on PC? As for now, that's going to do it for this one, and we'll be touching base in the next video. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.